It's being recorded. All right. So we can go ahead and get started. And yeah. So we'll introduce all of ourselves here shortly, but this was a presentation we're all pretty stoked about doing. It's sort of the invisible man in the treatment world, when we have to deal with sort of failures and what that looks like. And it's something I think most of us don't exactly enjoy talking about. We'd really like to not have that be the case, but often it is. So it is indeed a Monty Python reference. We decided to be cheeky with it. So that's what we went with. There was much deliberation and debate about it. So this is what we ended up with. So we'll go ahead and get started. We can go to the next slide and start the introductions and move from there. So my name is Marcus Shoemate. I'm the Clinical Outreach Director for Green Hill Recovery. We're a transitional living program and community-based IOP for young men, 18 to 27, sometimes a little older, sometimes a hair younger, just depending on sort of clinical fit. Primary substance use disorders with co-occurring mental health issues. We're based in Raleigh, North Carolina, downtown Raleigh, surrounded by universities, lots of career opportunities. Our whole sort of ethos and clinical sort of spirit and philosophy and everything sort of directed towards human flourishing. So what we're really shooting for is we want our guys to struggle, overcome, and have a sense of accomplishment and a sense of flourishing. So that's all of our sort of clinical work is around that. There's no sense in sort of giving up substances to be miserable. So if you're going to be working through your substances and making sense of them and how they impact your life, we want it to have something that's truly meaningful and impactful. So that's who we are. And Matt O'Connor is our clinical director, and I'll introduce him shortly. I'll kick it to Elizabeth to give her a Fulshear pitch.
Thanks, Marcus. Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm the Business Development Director here at Fulshear. And we are, Fulshear Treatment to Transition is a treatment to transition program for young adult women, ages 18 to 24-ish. 18 is the youngest, but 24, we can vary a bit there, 25, 26, on a case-by-case basis. We are located just outside of Houston, and we have 2 locations, our ranch and our apartments where we provide treatment. And then we work with young adult women who are struggling with depression, anxiety, addiction, trauma, mood, personality disorders, attachment disorders. And we really focus on healing through our exclusive integrated attachment model. And our mission really is to empower young women to become healthy and strong and influential, and be involved in the community, and really just make the best versions of themselves. And that's just a little bit about who we are. Nikki Garza is our CEO and clinical director, and we'll let her talk here shortly as well.
So just a little housekeeping. The presentation is going to run for about 65 minutes. We're going to leave some time for a Q&A at the end, so it'll be a total of 90 minutes. I'm going to be monitoring the chat box, so if you have any wildly inappropriate comments, feel free to drop them in. I'll look forward to interacting and engaging with them. You can also put questions in there if you happen to actually be interested in it and studious or something like that. So again, we're going to be recording the session, so your video may be captured. If you're not comfortable with that, feel free to turn it off. We'll be able to sort of also distribute the video afterwards if someone's mega nerd and actually wants to rewatch it and try to learn or something like that. I don't know why you would do that, but feel free. So it'll be worth 1.5 CEUs, and we'll get all of your information and everything. Feedback survey will be sent out at the end, pretty standard, and you'll get your CEU credits, and they'll be issued by Bayside. So we'll kick it to Nikki and let Nikki introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nikki Garza. I'm so excited to be with you all today. I wish we were in person and I could be hugging on each of you, and can't wait till the day comes where Zoom is not the norm and we get to be in person together. And I just agree with Marcus. This is such a cool topic. I'm so excited to be with you all. I know all of you have your highlighters and pens and you're all ready to be studious and get your CEU. But really, I'm really excited to be with you guys and to talk about failures and how we can use them in treatment. I'm LCSW. I am been in this industry about 20 years, and originally from Salt Lake City, Utah, came here to Houston about 7 years ago to run Fulshear. Have loved it and love working with young women. They challenge and change me every day, and love the team I get to work with. And I have a little 1-year-old who's my pride and joy that I love so much. So that's a little bit about me. Next slide, Matt.
Hello, everybody. I'm Matthew O'Connor. I'm the clinical director here at Green Hill Recovery. Don't have a ton to add because I think Marcus covered it and Nikki covered my excitement also about being able to do this presentation and really begin to have conversations about the parts of our programs that we might struggle, and areas that we can all grow together in ways that we can view what the treatment process looks like a little bit differently. So a little bit about me is my career has been solely focused on the substance use world, and I've worked at every level of care that you could, from court mandated all the way now to aftercare programming. And we are an average length of stay from 6 to 9 months. I think that that's an important part to just say because of the non-conciseness of it, as we're about to talk about some of the processes around that in regards to treatment goals. So any questions? And I look forward to connecting with everybody.
Matt, I just want to talk, like, how did you not talk about the mustache? Like, that is such a...
I know, it's becoming more just a part of me. It started as a joke here with all of the guys, and of who could grow the biggest mustache. And it was at the start of COVID-19 when everybody was locked down, and mine just kept growing and everybody just kept making fun of it. And it's been a really, I think, awesome opportunity to break some ice at most moments. And then I shaved it, and my wife was like very upset, which was surprising because she was upset I grew it. So it came back after that.
It's awesome.
And it is real, yes.
All right, well, we're going to get started in our event and start talking about failure and these flesh wounds. So today's learning objectives are: we're going to understand the impact of failure on self-esteem and resiliency. We're going to explore how allowing some failure in treatment builds accountability, remorse, and empathy. We're going to outline several ways to encourage growth from crisis and treatment, and how clinicians can leverage failures in their treatment plans. So we accomplished that. I feel like we've done good today. So to start us off, I mean, who doesn't love some Boy Meets World? So we're gonna watch just a short clip of Boy Meets World, and we can have some moments of nostalgia and sit back.
Mr. Feeney, I failed you. As we speak, our young Sean is foolishly rolling westward towards San Diego in certain disappointment.
Did he get the tickets?
No, he said the tickets didn't matter. He said nothing mattered and that he'd find a way in.
That's what he said, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I was standing in front of him and he asked me to move out of the way so he could go.
And did you move out of the way, Mr. Matthews?
Well, yeah, I mean, I really felt like I should. I know the assignment was to help him succeed, but Mr. Feeney, it was like he didn't need my help on this one. You know, he was gonna do this one on his own, no matter what. Guess I failed, huh?
On the contrary. Mr. Matthews, you passed with flying colors, and so does Mr. Hunter.
Of course we did. And clearly you've wasted all your time as I continue to comprehend nothing.
Corey, Sean isn't going to go to college and succeed because you want him to. He has to want to and believe that he can. And the only way he can do that is on his own, without your help.
Then why did you want me to help him?
You need to know you won't always be able to.
Yeah, like pretty soon we're all gonna have to do things on our own without someone's help. Right, Mr. Feeney? I think I understand why you've been so upset. And I think I know why you're gonna keep giving us assignments every day until our last day with you.
Miss Lawrence, you're butting in.
Yeah, I am, so fail me. That's life.
You won't be perfect anymore.
Oh, no one should be perfect. Besides, you learn from failure. And I need to know that, right?
You just yelled at me, but I'm Mr. Feeney.
One day you're going to have to let us go. One day you won't be able to teach us anymore, and you can't be sure if we're going to be all right.
Life is a lot tougher than school, my dears.
But the right thing to do is just step aside and let us live it. I mean, we learned that because you taught it to us.
Love that show. Like, we all need a Mr. Feeney in our life, right? Like, where is he? So we wanted to start with that just to outline some thoughts about learning from failure, and just, you know, there's definitely a lot of great nuggets in there and beautiful learning moments. But let's start with defining failure, because I think failure has become a dirty word in our society, and especially in our treatment centers. And I think you can see up there the Webster Dictionary of Failure and what that means. But really, when you're talking about it, what I want you to ask yourself, and even do an exercise with your team, of what or how do we know that we're a good treatment program? How do we know we're a good parent? How do we know we're a good partner? Like, how do we define that? Because if we define it by a lack of failure, right? And most of the time we define it by that we feel good about it, right? If we're talking about how do I define myself as a parent, I feel good, like I've succeeded, my kid's okay, they're not hurt, they're not any of that, then I'm a good parent. And I think we need to challenge and look at how we're defining ourselves, and get away from this concept that it's a dirty word. I like what Henry Ford said: failure is only the opportunity to begin again more intelligently. And William D. Brown said, failure is an event, never a person. So with that platform, we're going to jump into some other concepts of how we bring this idea into treatment. So next slide.
So thinking about success in failure in young adult treatment, as Nikki was alluding to, I believe semantics are super important in really looking at how we define success, but also looking at how do we define failure. And so as we're looking at more of a traditional view of treatment, I think that there is some semblance for guys coming into our program that the requirement is that they remain fully abstinent throughout their time here. And that the belief in that, I think, in 12-step programming, because for the longest time that was viewed as one of the only approaches to addiction recovery. And I will say we are 12-step oriented, which means like all of our guys are attending meetings, and they'll give 12-step recovery a shot. But I think that our idea of abstinence is a little bit different. So can we get the next little part there? So the guys coming into our program, as clinicians and as a program, we are expecting a return to use at some point if we are challenging our guys to the best of our ability. It doesn't mean that we support it, in that we approach this process as abstinence with boundaries. So if someone does make a mistake, or if someone does have a return to use, that there's an opportunity to explore and an opportunity to grow from that. There's obviously some boundaries and safety concerns that we'll consider in all of our decisions, but we are looking at this from a real individualized perspective when talking about return to use. Another traditional view is like, this time is just an opportunity to focus on yourself. And like, that's the only thing that you need to do while you're in treatment. and the reality is that's great for a short period of time, but in aftercare, we're really focused on how are they building community. As we know, healing is going to happen in relationship with others. So we want them not only building community with us, we're a community reinforcement approach, we want them to build community outside of Green Hill. Some of the most important relationships our guys are going to have are with coworkers, are with teachers, are with other students, are with study groups, so that they're taking the risk and putting themselves out there to build an actual community that's there once they're outside of treatment. Next. Disconnection from family to deter codependency. I really feel like as an industry, and maybe this is just my skewed perspective, that we're getting away from this a little bit more, that the importance of the family system is coming to the forefront of the treatment model. But for a long period of time, I know a lot of programs, we're not doing family sessions. That they might do some family education or they might do a family weekend. But in specifically is we're shifting and defining success and failure. We're also helping the family shift and define success and failure for themselves and for the client, and really taking a look at the family system and the focus on the family system. We are going to be doing weekly family therapy here, and our parents have opportunity to have 2 family support groups a week. And that's where we're also connecting them and helping them build community. We want to do that because the recovery process is about healing the whole system. Early in recovery, I was told at one point, like, I was trying to make a decision about whether or not to go to graduate school, and everybody around me was telling me, don't go. Every single person was like, don't go. You need to focus on recovery, and everything else will fall into place as long as you focus on recovery. And that focus on recovery was the only way to do the right thing. And I think we're actually trying to support action to increase the motivation towards recovery, especially with our young men. So we want you to try. You know, if school is it, like, try. Let's take some action towards a life that feels meaningful and purposeful that will also engage with recovery. That's not, and I think where we run into a little bit of difficulty at times is people working through the skewing of like, what's more important? Is school more important? Is recovery more important? Is work more important? But if we just said focus on the singular thing, we're not giving them the opportunity to look at that and to look at what is driving their motivation to continue to engage in the recovery process. They also need a carrot. So the carrot in a lot of ways helps them distinguish, like, this is what I am moving towards. That's why recovery feels meaningful and worthwhile. Traditionally, I think we viewed it as time, 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months, 9 months, a year of treatment. And what we're trying to shift is not thinking about it as time, but goals. Clients a lot of times actually are the ones who really want to know, like, how much time do I need to put in, or how long will I be here? And my answer to that is going to be, what do you want to get out of the program? How long will it take you to move towards that? And not utilizing time as a deciding factor. A big struggle that we'll often push up against or run up against is not always just with clients, but also our staff who've gone through their own recovery journey and struggle to not identify just with the outcome or the measurements of time or the measurements of, you need to do step 1, 2, 3, and 4 to be successful in our program. And that might be the case for some of our clients if their identified goal is I want to get through the first 6 steps in my time in recovery, in my time in your program, but their goals might be related outside of the recovery process. And we'll go to the next one.
Yeah, Matt, I love like that we've outlined those pieces, and it's so fun to see how the modern view is coming up to be much more prevalent in treatment centers and treatment programs of how we're taking on that. But with that comes consequences, right? As we've taken on this modern approach, we've also increased relapse, we've increased struggles, we've increased difficulties, and so I think in order to continue to move toward a much more effective treatment process of that modern view, we've got to figure out how do we honor this concept of choice? How do we honor the journey that's going on? How do we respect all that and not just look at this outcome, oh, they were able to abstain for so long, they were able to not be in the hospital for so long, they didn't self-harm for so long, like, and looking at that byproduct of it, but looking at the journey. And so in order to do that, we have to understand this concept of autonomy versus independence. So often we write treatment goals around being an independent young adult or an independent person. And the actuality is they're similar beasts, but they're rooted, the root reveals a key difference. And that is that independence is a byproduct of autonomy. So independence is that linguistic opposite of dependence, whereas autonomy comes from the Greek word auto, which means self, and nomos, which means custom or law. So to be an autonomous person, a person has to have internalized a system of rules for living independently. Like that's the point. And so if you do that, you become independent if you have this system of rules. So we as treatment providers, our goal should be around helping them create a system of guiding principles so that they're able to problem solve, to think creatively, while remaining rooted in their tried and true principles of behavior. And that's being autonomous. And that then creates that byproduct of independence. Well, in order to do that, we've got to get after this idea of confidence versus competence. So looking at those two ideas, because we can build somebody's confidence up with praise. We can actually even build it up if we protect around and have expectations of perfection or expectations of this performance, but that doesn't develop competence. And competence requires both the ability and experience, which means we have to be able to tolerate and hold a space for them to explore their world, for them to explore what it means to be sober, what it means to be living with a personality disorder and living with chaos, what it means to have school and have work and have friends and have a life and still be able to function. And they have to then learn how to manage risk through that. But in order to do that, they have to have this idea of competence, which is born out of both experience and ability. And again, praise will bring on confidence, but what we're looking for is competence, which then will bring out more of that competence, or that confidence. So then it looks at this idea of then connection, because in order to get to really make meaning out of autonomy, like why does somebody want to be autonomous? And relationships are what make autonomy and competence meaningful. And I can't stress that enough, that the more we have connection with people, like we want to have these moments of autonomy. We want to explore it for ourselves. So just as we're working in treatment planning as a program, how often do we say, oh, you can't do that? No, focus on yourself, focus on recovery. Don't go there, don't do that. Oh, you have a dirty UA. Oh, you self-harmed. Oh, you're set back. Don't go to the dates, don't go to the parties, don't go to, like all of those things. And so like in asking yourselves of where are we saying no and limiting growth opportunities. All right, you can go jump to the next slide.
So in limiting opportunities, what happens if we don't? What happens if we give our clients the opportunity to take risks in really looking at, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a moment, but as we're looking at supporting failure and in what does that mean? What does that look like? What does that generate for our clients? Self-efficacy often gets tied into this idea of confidence and or like self-confidence or self-worth, and it's different. Efficacy is our general belief of whether or not we're going to be able to do something. So often our guys are going to approach something like, oh, I'm not going to try this because like I'm going to fail. Like, how often do we hold ourselves back from doing something maybe based on how we're going to look or what's the outcome of that, it being very anxiety driven. Efficacy is going to be built on walking through an opportunity and having success or failure, but walking through it and actually trying and giving yourself a shot at what you're looking for. And when we're supporting choice, we're really supporting our clients' experience of being brave and not living in a space of fear and looking for every reason why they can't do something. Addiction and mental health already has done that from a cultural standpoint. So we really want to support our clients in gaining efficacy, looking at where agency and they're in having and honoring the fact that they're going to try this experience, that you taking the effort is it, that you taking the risk and looking for an opportunity to grow is the actual path versus what is the outcome at the end of this path. As clinicians, we want to help our clients see like, this might be your outcome. Like if you go on a date and you know your pattern is, we changed. Can we go back, please? Thanks. That if you're going to go on a date, the outcome based on your history might be a return to use, because if it doesn't go well, that's been what happens. But that doesn't mean don't try. That doesn't mean don't have an experience and see what comes up for you emotionally. So when someone struggles, it's easier for them to connect with the fact that other people struggle. And it really does generate empathy for them and their peers. When someone comes in and talks about struggling with cravings, and there's a guy who's like, oh, I've had no cravings, blah, blah, blah. But like he hasn't ventured out. And then he goes on an adventure and comes back and is like, man, you were talking about this 3 weeks ago. I really connect with that. I really connect with the fact that, you know, going to a concert is a really difficult process. So failure in choice is really going to support them in connection with their peers also. Resiliency, from a neuroscientific standpoint, the more we help our clients build resiliency or autonomy and be able to make choice in their life, they're going to be more resilient to failure. The more we fail, the easier it comes to fail. And then we create neural pathways that allow us to not view, my little air quotes here, failure as a failure, but again, as an experience. So how are we semantically helping our clients and our program view failure as another opportunity or another experience?
And Matt, don't you find like the closing the loop part of when they're going out, when you're allowing this choice and honoring them and kind of letting them create those guiding principles and systems of what they want to do, and they're experiencing like, hey, I actually don't want that in my life, or what, like you need the follow-up, right? Like you need to be able to have that connection we were talking about, where then they can process that through without the fear of like, oh, you're gonna, because I may have smoked weed that night, I'm not gonna tell you, I'm not gonna be able to fall through and create that principle of system of how I want to guide. So there has to be kind of that safety of that follow through and processing, right?
Yeah, and in our program, our guys are often going to know that everything happens on an individualized basis. There's not like a clear-cut answer of like, if this happens, then always. Now, that being said, if someone has gone on a date, they knew that it was risky, but and everybody actually was like, like, maybe you should wait, like, or not, you have choice in that. And the person still chose to go. And we supported his choice in going on the date. Like, you're allowed to do that, man. Like, this is part of your treatment process, and you really get to define that and what that looks like for you. And it didn't go well. It actually went super poorly. And the first thing he did when he came back was tell his staff, like, hey, it actually went super poorly, and this is what happened. We want to create a container in a space where guys understand that it is not, or clients, I keep saying guys, I'm sorry, I'm from up north, so like guys and things like
Guys and gals, we're good.
and gals and like all that. It's but where he felt safe enough to come back and be like, hey, not only did that not go well, then I had this emotional experience come up that was like very invalidating of who I am as a human. I had a return to use, and then he's processing it in group because there's not a punishment culture. And I think that failure is, we're thinking about consequences, right? Like there's a culture of punishment of failure. So we're doing our best to like maintain integrity and safety of our program while balancing people having an experience that offers them the opportunity to grow. I can't tell you how many times, and specifically around dating for young men, that someone leaves if they haven't had the experience of dating and they go on a date, and it's the first thing that brings them back out into a return to use, and then they don't have the support of our program. Whereas if if they do it multiple times, even if it hasn't gone well each time, you're building resiliency. You're learning each time that, oh, this worked, this didn't work, this worked, this didn't work. And that we're not going to live in fear and try and protect our client from the outcome based on our program. So if we keep our clients protected, they're still going to be fearful of doing anything. If we say you can't, or you don't, or this is too risky, right? Then they're going to leave here in fear that they're going to magically slip, fall, make a huge mistake, and everything's over. And if we don't allow them the choice, all that does is recreate a system for them of the man in a lot of ways. Like, you're doing this to me, you're holding me down, you're holding me back. And that can be very isolating for our guys, or for our clients, right? It's like, you don't come to treatment to sit in a house. You come to have experiences of growth. You come to have experiences of connection and community. And so I just feel like we have to live up to that. Anything you want to add there, Nikki?
No, I think I'll add on the next slide, because I think, so I think we've lobbied enough to say, like, it's important that you allow choice, that you allow experiences, and you allow growth. And then now it's like how to. And in order to do that, we'll get to some of those concepts of how do you create safety and what do you do after and all of that piece. But we've got to come to an underlying principle first of this growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And hopefully enough of you know, or all of you know, like Carol Dweck's work of growth mindset. It's called Mindset is the name of the book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, especially for treatment providers, even for parents, if you want to just give out. The other plug I'll give is the book called The Gift of Failure by Jessica Laney. And she is, that's a great one for parents to read as well. Like, she talks through kind of even in the teaching and then the school of things. So if there's resources you're looking for, those two are great. But let's just get a kind of a foundation of this idea of growth mindset. So a person with fixed mindset is someone who believes their intelligence, talents, and abilities are innate and remain the same throughout life, no matter what he or she does. A person with a growth mindset, however, believes that these qualities are simply a starting point, that more is always possible through effort and personal development. Those with growth mindset are motivated to learn just for learning's sake. And they believe that they can stretch and push themselves. They can do more if they, like, by accomplishing that, they thrive on challenge, and they understand failing and trying again is part of the process and part of the journey. And you can see some of those mindset comments, like on the screen there, of what they are. But when we try to save them from risk and failure, we're communicating that we don't have faith in their ability to grow, improve, and surmount, and we are creating a fixed mindset. Let me say that again. If we save them from risk, from failure, we communicate that we don't believe in them, in their ability to grow, improve, and to surmount challenges, and we create a fixed mindset. And here's the consequences of the fixed mindset. Carol Dweck in her work and her research talks about this amazing work or experiment that they did where they took several hundred adolescent students and they gave them 10 test questions. And at the end of the questions, they took half the students, they were praised with, wow, you're so, you got 8, let's say 8 right on the test. That's a really good score. You must be really smart. And then they took the other ones and said, wow, you got 8 right. And that's a really good score. You must have worked really hard. And what they found was the two groups did about the same on the tests before they were praised. And after the praise was lavished, they began to look like two very different groups of adolescents. And what they found was the one that was praised for their smartness and this fixedness about them, they actually, when given the opportunity, they rejected anything challenging after that. So they brought them back and gave them they gave these two groups another test that was harder. And the group that had been praised on its work, on their hard work, they tried and they pushed through and they tried to do it. And afterwards they reported that they actually enjoyed it. Whereas the other group that was praised on their smartness didn't try, wouldn't attempt the challenge and said it was tough and difficult and didn't want to do it. And then interesting enough, they brought them back again and asked them to write a future letter to themselves or to another group of students about how it was and how they did. And what they found was this group with that fixed mindset, they actually lied about their scores, said they did better than they did, and talked about overpraised how great it was. Whereas the other ones talked about it being a challenge, but fun. And so Carol's conclusion of it, she said, we took ordinary children and made them into liars simply by telling them that they were smart. And I think that we can look at that too in a treatment sense, in a treatment world, that we can take these people seeking treatment, and by just stunting their ability to take risk, growth, honoring that choice and push towards exploring their world, we're pushing them into a fixed mindset, and we're not actually creating the treatment success that we want. Anything you want to say with that, Matt?
No, there's not anything I want to add. I think this was a point where we were going to ask anyways that people see in their lives and or with their clients.
So yeah, if you have any of that, if you want to put it in the chat, so you can't speak through, but we'd love to hear there's the two questions on this. What would the client get from this if it goes well? What might they struggle with, if you let your clients fail? And so would love to hear or read anything in the chat as we kind of continue with that.
So we're going to move a little bit more into how we work with this as clinicians and as programs. So Pema Chodron, I don't know if y'all are familiar with her, but she's like this little Buddhist nun, and she gave the commencement speak at my graduation, and she came out and she trotted out, and she sat here, and commencement speeches, you're sitting there and you're like, oh, someone's gonna pump me up, right? And she just walks out and she's like, so everybody's gonna be really mad at me today, but y'all are gonna fail, and you're gonna fail miserably. It's going to be absolutely miserable failure ahead of you. But there was real beauty in it, right? It's she came out and gave this incredible talk on failure. You can actually watch the talk at some point if you want, if you Google it. But she spoke about how do we really be groundless in this idea of failure? How do we allow ourselves to take risks, to look at, okay, if this doesn't go well, what does that mean? What does that say? How do I typically make things like this about me as a person? Can I sit with the notion that I don't have all the answers of how this is going to go? And I think we need to ask ourselves that as clinicians. How am I trying to protect this person in this moment from failure? Is that about me? Is that about them? Is that about their parents? What is the risk if this goes well? In really, really thinking in the lines of, is this the best opportunity for someone to grow? What is the growth that they might get out of completing this activity? For someone who loves music, being able to go to a concert is risky, right? And what might they struggle with during that time? They might struggle with the fact that there might be drugs. But the reward is if that goes well and they're able to stay abstinent during that time, is so much higher than the potential that they are going and they're going to use right away, especially if we help them develop a plan around that, which is how are you going with someone in recovery? And how do we actually build support around our clients to do the things that they want to do versus look at our program as a way of this is the support that we can give you and you need to fall into that. But this idea with clients is we don't have all the answers, but we can present options and still give them the opportunity to make choice based on that, and get curious with them about their experience and get curious with your supervisor about your experience. Why are we trying to protect our clients? Where does that come from for us? I'm a fixer. I know this about myself. I try and fix everything in my system. So I need to be very mindful of that in my relationship with my clients. How do I not try and fix or stop them from having an experience? What I mean by that is am I protecting you from failure? Or if I know that a client is going to struggle with something, do I always tell them? Or is it more important for them to have this experience and figure it out? You want to think about risk, but you also want to think about reward. And I think we get so stuck in this box of this is too risky. versus looking at like, okay, but what will they get if it does go well? Within this though, I think I'm not sitting here trying to communicate like, we have no boundaries. There's no structure. There's no limits. Just free everybody. No consequences. Like, I mean, that would be insanity, as we know. But helping them identify what's important to them in the beginning of the process, what their values are, and really looking at how does what they're doing match with what they're trying to be or who they're trying to become. Like we can, and that's where the guardrails come in, right? Is like, does this match who you're trying to grow towards? Does this match who you're trying to become or what you're trying to do? Or, and if it doesn't, then we help them really kind of create some dissonance between that and make a healthy choice. And I've said no. I want to be wildly clear. Like I say no often. I'll have to hold boundaries of like a guy's like, oh, I'm here 2 weeks. I'm totally ready to get on Tinder. I want to go on dates, and I like need to go like this frat party. Like, no, you're just not yet. And then be able to process that through with in our relationship. So I don't want it to sound like they just get to do everything. There are guides, and there should be guides in all of our programs. Is like, but how close are the guardrails? Right? Like how is it a 1-lane highway with like guardrails like this, or do we have a 4-lane highway where they have choice and they might bump up against stuff?
I think that's important, like to like really have those definitions, because it's the underlying principle of how we're going to run treatment, in that if we believe boundaries and consequences change behavior, then we're going to ride that we're going to create this guardrail like this. If we believe that experience and relationship changes behavior, then we're going to open that up. We're going to have guardrails. So when we define boundaries are guardrails, right? They kind of help and create safety. Limits are things that are going to go off the cliff. And so what are our limits? What cannot we, what can we not tolerate? And then consequences when those things are breached, to help get them back in the center of safety. And again, it goes back to, if you have to ask yourself, do I believe consequences change behavior? And really kind of challenge some of that piece, versus do consequences create safety? And I love I love it when I put the concept of getting a speeding ticket, right? Of speeding. And we all have a law of what a speed limit is. And I am certain there are people, everyone on here has broken that law, and not all of us have faced the consequences for breaking. Marcus is saying no. I'm going to disagree. But some of us, maybe he's perfect. Maybe he follows the speed limit all the time. But I'll tell you, if I see a white car in my rearview mirror that may look like a police officer, my behaviors change. I will slow it down, or if I think there might be a police officer up ahead, I'll slow it down because I don't want the consequence. So I will maybe change my behavior for this period of time because I don't want the consequence. But long-term success is not going to change. But I'll tell, like when I had a child and my 1-year-old was in my car, or my infant was in my car with me, I was much more conscientious of what my speed limit was and how my driving was and what driving was happening. And so the relationship and my internal autonomous system helped me govern that. And so I think that, but we want boundaries. We want speed limits throughout our country, and we want those guardrails to create safety. But if we want long-term success, we've got to allow exploration within that.
And I think making sure that we're not recreating, especially with our young adults, the same system that they already have.
Well said.
Their parents have been the guardrails, right? And I spend so much time with families on telling them, like, no, actually, like, this is great. And they're like, my kid is failing. And I'm like, yes. They need, like, and if you continue to protect, they're going to continue to be angry, and they're going to continue to externalize. And if we continue to create that same system, the client doesn't develop the internal agency and efficacy that they need to be successful when they leave us. I think I'm often, when we're thinking about long-term success, I'm not thinking about clients in my program. I'm not thinking about success in my program. I'm thinking about, what does their life look like when they're done here? What does it look like when they're outside of Green Hill? That's what's important to me. we can manage, we can work almost anything that comes up in our program. But as Mr. Feeney said, life isn't always that kind. Life doesn't give you that many breaks. So I'm looking at like, what does this person need to have an experience of to have long-term success? So for some of our guys, like they come in with struggles around sexuality or sex and things like they need to work through that stuff while they're with us often.
Well, and I think it leads then to this next conversation of that high expectations of treatment providers, and that because you talked about like when we examine ourselves of what it is that we are, why we're trying to create these rigid controls and not allow failure. Like often it can be because it's pretty punishing from some people, parents, referring partners, whatever it may be, if we as a treatment center have some failures. Like if they're like, what's happening over there, Nikki? What are you letting them do over there? And that can be a pretty hard place to hold. And so I think there has to be an agreement amongst us treatment providers that we honor choice, autonomy, and failure because we see the greater good of it, and being allowed like treatment providers to have moments of failure, because it's a dance to try to, like, each person's so unique and individual, and it's a dance of that. So I really think we have to honor both parts of that.
And I think that we think about that in our system also.
Mm-hmm.
For any of you who are supervisors, right? Like, what are your expectations of your employees? What are your expectations that they manage? How they manage their clients, or what clients are managed, what their client outcomes are, what's their client retention rate? Like, what are our expectations of our employees? Because guess what? That's going to bleed into their relationship with their client. So we want to look at expectations really all around. There's external expectations that we might get from referents, parents, et cetera. But there's also looking at what are our internal expectations as an organization. And it's not to say I expect my therapists and my case managers and my program staff to take risks. They might come into my office and are like, I really want to try this with this kid or this family. And I'm like, great. I'm the one who's going to hold the risk or reward in that scenario, right? And if the risk is too high, I'm like, no, definitely don't do that. But I want someone to come to me with an idea, right? And let's really exhibit this with our employees, but also like our coworkers. Let's support our coworkers in making specific choices. And then when you create an ecosystem around this, I do believe that it will shift an organization in a way that sees failure as an opportunity.
Nice. Okay, let's jump to the next. I want to share with you just a case conceptualization and help you see. I thought of a lot of examples where we've used this, but I wanted to offer one because we work primary mental health is our area, but we do have secondary substance abuse, and so we see a lot of young women with issues coming up from the mental health stuff. So not necessarily that it's just a relapse, but within substance use, but more so of self-harm, suicidality, physical violence, all of that stuff. But we had this young woman, a 19-year-old, who was adopted and was at our ranch, and we had a couple of stray dogs come onto campus, and she took those stray dogs, she hid them in one of the cottages and was not letting anybody near them. And one of the clients came up to her and was like trying to be like, no, you need to get these stray dogs out of here, like all of this. And she punched that client who was saying it, like punched her in the face. And then she ran to her bedroom and put herself in the bed and pulled the sheet over and wouldn't come out or talk to anyone, and was like, I know you're all going to kick me out. I've effed up, like all this stuff was coming out. So what we did with that, because I mean, that's a pretty strong limit, like violence, like we can have a pretty strong limit of that, of violence in treatment centers, right? Like how do you have a safe treatment center if you have violence happening? And so of course there needs to be guardrails and limits of that. But for this young woman, it was what we started with before jumping to the she's kicked out of treatment and she's failed and we felt and she's not appropriate for us and she can't be here because she's hurting people. What we did was we got curious. And when you look at it through an attachment lens, this young woman who was adopted, having stray dogs come onto campus and was worried about the pound being called and them being taken to a kill shelter and what that might all mean. And as we got curious with that and understood her threat and helped her understand why she even got into that level of threat, like why she reacted in such a primal way of punching someone. And we stayed with her, and we actually supported a repair process between these two young women. And then we helped recreate safety within the milieu and what boundaries could look like, and how this young woman could repair. She completed our program. She graduated. She's in college right now, and she actually ended with a really strong relationship with this young woman that she punched. And so that's a way of, I mean, there was a lot of work within that way. And of course, there was a lot of fear from a parent who's got a daughter calling saying, I just got punched in the face at treatment, and having to be able to manage that and teach this concept and see all of this come full circle. It was a beautiful and painful and long process. Matt, you want to share yours?
I'm not muted. Great. I was just thinking about this, Nikki, of like, the fact that I'm also presenting something that like ended well, right? And like, how are we, but like, how are we?
Right. That's super fun. I was thinking that too. I was like, I could think of ones that haven't ended so well.
Right.
At treatment.
And we might be, if we want to talk about like what that type of failure looks like at the end. I was also just recognizing like, oh, both of our stories probably have a happy ending. And is that like still this
concept of we have to have a perfect ending?
Yeah, exactly.
I'll share with you some not good endings someday if anybody wants. I'm happy to share them.
So I think that the reason is I'm reflecting on that. The reason I want to present something that ended well is because this was something that historically someone might have gotten kicked out of the program for, right? And like, is that reactivity going to allow them the opportunity to fail and grow? So Frank was a 20-year-old young man who came to us. Our program, you typically go to residential first. We're not like Fulshear, where it's all on the same campus. You'll go to residential and then you'll come to us after. So after treatment, he came and he used kratom within the first 2 weeks of being here. And it was probably even less. It might have been like 7 days, 6, 7 days. Motivation was like this. Like, oh, like I'll be there, sure. And typically I think when someone's motivation wanes like that, like we can get a little reactive. Like if they're not sure they want to be here or don't want to be here, well, if you don't want to be here and you use, like, what are we doing, right? But he used, and he could have sat on this. He could have sat on it a while. And he came to a staff about 48 hours later. And for 2 days, we knew something was up. He wouldn't leave his bedroom. He didn't want to talk to us. He was like, no, I just don't feel well. And we can get our suspicions or whatnot. But he came to staff, and it seemed like he spent that time looking at like, why did I keep a secret? Like, why was I trying to keep this a secret? Where did that come from for me? And was really reflective on the fact of like, that's why I'm here. Like, I'm here because I have substance use issues. And I did use, and I feel really guilty about that. And I feel shameful about that. And how do we not, like, I think it was very important for us to not pile on what his internal experience was. Like, how do we help him see that, like, and got really curious of like, well, things inside and outside, like what was in your control in these experiences, what was not. And he immediately was willing to like address it with the community, this is the typical ripple we get, is like guys are like, oh yeah, but like I just want this to be between you and me. And it's like, well, no, we need to help keep our community safe and have conversations about what does this mean to the community. But he was willing to go to the community. And when we got curious about his experience, what we learned is there was a lot of body image stuff coming up for him. And there was a lot of discomfort in his internal process that, of course, he went back to the main coping mechanism that worked for him. But if we would have been like, no, you're good, like, catch you later, bud, like, would we have given him the space to really look at what was the driving force underneath? And after this, like, I'd say 3 months after, and he engaged in the recovery process and all that good stuff, but he was like, I want to go back to school. And we were like, great. Like, we actually support this, even though he might be perceived as a higher risk because he had some return to use. And really, we could have gone into this fear state with him around like, well, you know, like you just had this return to use. Is it a good idea right now? Like, he was like, I think I want to go back to school, go back to school. Um, he's like about to finish his BA in psych. And because we didn't say you aren't ready, because we supported his agency and his efficacy, I do believe that that allowed him to internally begin to believe that he could do it. And that not only translated in school, where he like went and like didn't do great the first semester, like class-wise, but he engaged very fully in his recovery. It was a parallel process of healing for him. Of like, I was struggling in school, I was struggling in recovery, I was getting better at school, I was getting better in recovery. And then we were able to highlight that for him throughout his experience. And we'll just talk a little bit more about some of the like post disruption or post struggles and how we work with clients. Next slide.
All right, I love this concept, the aftermath, the neosporin, and like working with that client post disruption. And if there's anything you can take away, it's looking at these 3 keywords: remorse, empathy, repair. And it's going to be like a process of teaching and allowing them to explore these 3 concepts. But this is what we're looking for post disruption. Is we're looking for them to look at this accountability, this remorse. And there can be a whole other topic in CEU event on shame and remorse, shame versus remorse, all that stuff. But that's where you want to get after, is how do we get them into a state of remorse. And then empathy, self versus others, and having them see what the experience is from another point of view. And then repair, how do we do the relational work? How do we get back into that cycle of connection, is through that repair. And I wanted to, oh wait, go back.
Go back, please. So, do you want to go first, Nikki? Or do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm already chatting. I'm talking. So it's important to look at, like, when my young women, who those of them that come in with a personality disorder, and especially that borderline, what we see in a very similar trend of concepts with this is remorse starts for them. What we're looking at is they start to see this blame externally instead of like an internal remorse. And so we often have to help them kind of shift into self, into looking at that self. And what they will move towards is like, well, I did it for this and this. I was bored and or nobody was there to pick me up, or I was lonely, or I didn't get my phone, or whatever the external blame may be. But there's always this reason. And then it's when we look at empathy, they'll push towards, they want people to empathize with them instead of what must people experience with their disruption. What was the empathy of that? So creating that other. And then again, it will be like, well, I'll repair when they say sorry. And so it's really about change, how we alter them is getting them back into this sense of accountability and other focus and relational focus. And you see with your young men a little differently, right, Matt?
Yeah, it was an interesting part of our planning where Nikki and I were like, well, what do you see? Well, what do you see? And then it to be so different. And we were like, because we really wanted to, I think, stay out of any gender differences in a lot of ways. And, but we did recognize, like, specifically, we are talking about substance use. And I do want to acknowledge that. Like, it looks different sometimes with people with different mental health. But what we tend to see in our program is remorse for our guys often looks like one of 2 ways. One is like this complete oversaturation or overreaction or overreactive remorse of like, oh, I'm the worst ever. Like, can you believe what a terrible person I am? And, or like, nah, man, like I didn't do it. And you could be sitting there with like papers of like your analysis and being like, yes, you did. And they're like, nah, like it did not happen. And I think when we're working on helping someone have an experience of remorse is it also needs to be right-sized. With addiction, we tend to see extremes. It is either that like I'm the worst, or like it didn't even happen and I'm going to avoid it. Like I'm going to put my blinders on. And for both of these individuals, like this type of person, what we're trying to help them have the experience of is like, why did this happen, and what is your internal, like actually connect with your internal process, not your internal story, right? Like what's your internal emotional process, and not what are you telling yourself about this experience, but how are you feeling? And when we can typically help them drop into that, remorse is accessible. For young men, remorse is often hard without falling into guilt and shame, especially in the early recovery process. And that part can be pretty consuming for a young man. And empathy, when you're in shame, and I don't know if anyone can relate to this experience, but when I'm in shame, it's very difficult for me to be like empathetic towards another person's experience, right? Because I'm the worst. So like, how can you be the worst if I'm the worst? And so what we want to do is help them externalize the experience. So helping them identify like this thing did happen. And what if this thing happened to someone else? We might also even say how like doing some like quasi like empty chair stuff of like, how would your parents experience this? Or what would you think if your friend, if this same experience happened to your friend, and like outline it and help them connect with their empathy to pop out of that shame place. In similar with repair, we're often trying to create repair in our community around a return to use because there's a disruption or a loss of trust. And this is another group management standpoint. If like someone's not receiving, like we might stop and allow the repair to happen a little bit later, but we will want them to engage with the community in a way that they're able to connect with how their behavior or using did impact other members of our group, and be able to ask questions about it and be able to receive feedback about it. So that the last part for us tends to be a little, you feel it out. Like when is repair appropriate for the client, but also when is the community in a space to receive that repair?
And I think that's an important distinction, because often with the clients with some anxiety disorders, they'll want to repair instantly and can't sit in the discomfort. And then they want people to just be over it. And they don't allow time for that person to process and for there to be distance. And so I think a lot of that teaching can be effective in helping them, being able to hold a space where you can sit with them in their discomfort and distress, and that they may not be able to repair for a week and or so or longer, and that the community may not be ready to welcome them right back in, and that is a consequence that you face, and that is part of the failure, right? That's part of the exploration. You have to face that. You have to tolerate that people don't want to be around you until a certain time, and they may have to go through a forgiveness process and all of those.
Next slide.
Okay, this is one of my favorite videos. So there's two parts. So we're gonna watch this fun little duck video, but I want you to think about it. So we've talked a lot about how do we create space for the young adult to fail, but now like think about it also taking it back. And when we talked about like we got to create space for our employees and for ourselves and like allow exploration, allow us all to work together. But there's also a part of grace in the families. How do we allow that? Like if you think about it, they've been doing things within their family system to just survive. And so they're going to have to learn some new tools and techniques and be with each other during this time too. So I want you to think of all three of those systems: the client, the family, our treatment center, and then watch this really great video.
Hello, babies. You could get to safety. Oh my god. Oh. No, I can't. No. Oh my god, there's little tiny bodies. Come on, you got this. Step on your... Oh my
Oh, he didn't make it.
Isn't that a great video representation of life? Some get up quicker than others. And some of us get up, fall down, get up, fall down, get up, fall down. Some of us are the last person and still fall down a million times. And I love the ending of it where you see the mother duck just sitting there waiting for that last one to come up. So there's so many metaphors that can be taken from that video. But we want to first off, like, to our horns, because we ended with time for questions. Matt, remember we were like, we're gonna overtalk all this. So we're gonna open it up for some questions. And would love to have any of your thoughts, questions, or experiences in this concept. I believe we're gonna take off where you'll be able to have the ability to take off mute.
Also, if you're not comfortable taking yourself off mute, feel free to put questions in the chat box and I'll monitor it and throw them up for.
Devin, yeah.
I seriously just loved that video in general because it's just, like looking at that, like that mother just sitting there waiting, and like just being a mother of my own, it's hard. You always want to just go and grab, go and like go help out immediately. Like, here, let me help you. And she was just sitting there patiently waiting. That's the perfect representation.
Thanks. Devin, you're gonna see something?
Oh, Jesse here. I just wondering, what are some of the tells y'all have of when it's time to go to the concert, Matt, your analogy? Like, is it length of time or their seriousness, or what are some of the tells of whether they're ready to go to the fish show or whatever the case may be?
So
Of course, you
I'll
asked
speak
about fish.
So I love that you asked about, do you want to go first, Nikki? Like,
yeah. I mean, I'll share with us, like, we have a unique thing in that with our program, we've got a little bit of a container that kind of allows some time, but I would definitely need some time to form a relationship, because like in all exploration and all ability to explore your world, trust has to be at the foundation. And so we've got to have the connection for that. And then, and so I wouldn't be having somebody come in 1 week and we're jumping to the concert of it. But I would say any answer, I always answer when they say I want to do something. I'm like, yes, and here's what you do to get there. I love the yes and so this concept for us, we have a more of a container, and then when they move on, so we're looking at yes, and what we need to see is that you're honoring and following this system. So you turn in your phone when it's expected, or you're showing up to programming. So I want to see that you're able to commit to keeping your word here, and then we can allow this to explore here. So a lot of it's just based on that piece of yes and so what are we seeing in the community where that trust is mutual.
So for us, because we're operating in aftercare, guys are going to come with either, if we're looking at time, right? Like they're going to come with either 30, 60, or 90 days of some recovery, right? Because they've been in a contained environment. I love that you use the example of fish though, right? Because I would actually feel less worried about a fish show, because fish have a sober following, right? And so like, if someone was here 2 weeks and they're like, I have this ticket for this fish show, and I'm just using 2 weeks as a time frame because it's not much, right? And I'd be like, okay, come to me with a plan. And I'd get curious about, could they come to me with a plan that involves them going to the fish show and connecting with the sober recovery community at the fish show? Or do they come to me with a plan that involves another member of the community who's in recovery? Or do they meet? So maybe I would connect them with one of my contacts who I know would go to fish with them, right? It's so often I'm going to reflect back to them, like, what's the best way for you to think you can like move through this and continue to engage with the goals? Now we, as a program, have, when someone first gets here, we ask that they go somewhere with someone at all times for 30 days. So it would be like they would, if they were going to go to a fish show, right? Like they would have to go with someone who's further along in the program, that person who's further along in the program, and then might come up with a plan around going to the sober group at the fish show. So if that helps, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you both. Thank you so much.
Other questions, comments, experiences?
Or even anything you think we missed? The last part with families, Nikki and I felt like that's a whole nother, like the grace for parents to fail. Like we were like, oh, that's probably a whole nother presentation, but so we just kind of consolidated that a little bit.
Can you all give an example? Someone who's learning from failing and falling on their face and gets back up, maybe with an example of that.
Of the family falling on their face?
No,
Yeah.
like, I'm sorry if there's questions in the chat. I didn't hear, but yeah, like an example of a client failing and then learning from it, perhaps.
Yeah, I can think of one of our families who it struggles with the narrative of the narrative of their daughter and her representation of what history looked like for their family, and feeling like she was blamed for everything, and she wants to blame mom for everything. So there's kind of that crisscross of things. And so it's been very clunky in getting them to communicate and repair because they're both stuck in the being right. And they both wanted to say, we don't need a relationship with each other. And so we've continued to push family therapy and then a family intensive that would allow them to stay engaged in it. So for me, it's been very clunky, but they've continued to stay exploring in it. That's kind of one that just came to the top of my head. I don't know. I might think of another one.
One family, I think, perceived failure that I was just thinking about is we had a guy in our program at one point who missed one question on the SATs and could go to any school he wanted to. And he was like, I want to work at Chick-fil-A. Like, and it wasn't, he was like, I just have pressured myself for so long, right? And the family just saw that as like the deepest failure that this kid could ever work at Chick-fil-A, right? Like they have failed as parents, he's failed as a son, like it is just all around like the worst. And we really just worked with them on like getting and gaining understanding of their son's experience and actually acknowledging and listening. And like he worked at Chick-fil-A and then he transferred to another Chick-fil-A that was like by the university that he wanted to go to, like a long time down the road. But like they had to, but like the system had to reacclimate to what would be their new normal. There's a couple questions in the chat though. What happens when a client refuses the repair process? Ooh. So I'll say for us, it's very rare that I'd say someone can refuse the repair, because we run so much group here that someone can refuse the repair process, where then another member of the community doesn't say like, hey, we're going to repair this or you're not going to be a part of the community. So what that might look like is another client being like, hey, like you haven't talked about this in group, and I think that this is great for us to actually talk about it, or like how this would impact us. And if the person left, like it was like, I'm just straight not willing to do that, we're having different conversations about their readiness to continue to engage in our program, truthfully, at that point. And I think that that those three, the remorse, empathy, and repair, are part of a requirement in maintaining safety for our program. So if they're not willing to repair, it then starts to become a safety issue. So we're having, and I'd have conversations with the client about that, right? Like if you're not willing to repair, which is again your choice, like that's fine, like you don't have to repair here, But if you're not willing to, like it's going to impact the safety of our community. So that would be my initial answer. Like if they were just straight refusal for a long period of time.
And I agree. I think that if you have that stalemate of the refusal, like you can't recreate safety and you never get back connection, which is the healing process of treatment. So treatment would then be ineffective. But I would start with getting curious about what is preventing the repair. And I would imagine that they probably need to, like that shame is what's overwhelming them instead of remorse. And so that's where I would get curious and start doing the work there of helping bring the shame levels down by challenging the silence, secrecy, and judgment, and getting remorse up, where it's where we talked about at the beginning, defining that failure is what was it that I have to read exactly, Henry Ford's. Failure is an opportunity to begin more intelligently, and failure is the event, not a person. And so I would help, like that brings remorse up and hopefully brings shame down once that silence, secrecy, and judgment is challenged. And so once that curiosity happens and we get more of that remorse, I think we'd see more of the empathy and repair wanting to come out. But if they stay in that shame, I think it will keep them from ever getting into the repair process, which keeps them from getting into connection, which keeps safety from forming in the communities, which then you have to have really hard conversations, which is one of those failures of treatment, right? And those hard conversations. And I want to follow up with this before I jump into the next question, because both Matt and I presented these cases of where they ended well staying in treatment. We've asked many clients to leave treatment, and it's heartbreaking for me because I wish I could help them all, but I found it interesting of one 2 years later came back with being so sober and hitting treatment goals. And we actually went back and did a graduation with her 2 years after and celebrated, because we don't believe treatment just happens within our four walls, and that there's an impact you have within that person's journey, and that they'll continue to change their journey, and that we can celebrate it all along the way as they grow.
And just speaking to that for one moment also is, often as a program, I'm looking at success based on like, what is someone's ability to re-engage after the mistake? And I mean like after here, right? Like, so if someone's removed or we ask someone to leave the program, like, are we creating a space where they're willing to come back? Like, letting someone know that like the door is always open to this process, to the healing process. So we want to make sure that that's there for you. And like this level or where we're at right now is not it. So can you speak more to staff failing? I think something difficult to balance is training for staff and staff retention in the residential setting. So do you want me to go first, Nikki, or what's your?
Yeah. If you have something, I'll pull up.
So I think if we create a sense of curiosity with our staff, like we're trying to do with our clients, that it actually increases staff retention. If we're not looking at it from a punishment standpoint, or like as a staff, like this is what you're doing wrong, that we're looking at it similar to how we're looking at it with clients, I believe it's actually increased our staff retention. As a program where our staff retention is like from a therapist standpoint is good. And what I mean by that is like, we're able to like, I get curious with my therapist of like, okay, like this isn't working. This is like, how can we create more of this? And like, if that's not working, what do you need to do differently? So semantically, like my staff don't really feel like they can fail, right? Like in that, and I want my clients to feel like that also, right? Like there's no failing, right? I'd say for program staff, it's a bit harder, like the on the boots, on the ground staff, but we actually try and create the same environment, which is like, be curious about like what happened for you during this experience. Obviously because they're staff, there's certain, like boundaries that we have, just like with clients, like if you cross this, like that's that's unfortunate, right? Like that we can no longer work together. But I think that there's the curiosity and also the growth mindset. How are we helping our staff grow? Like all of my staff, like from all the way down, and like we do this as an organization. What do you want to do next? What is your next goal? How are we as a program helping you move towards that? And like our staff have plans, and we just had a staff who had a timeline about how long he was allowed to stay here because he kept avoiding business school. Like I mean that, right? Like, and so when we're thinking about staff retention or training for staff, like my staff is trained to understand like what we are asking of the clients, we will ask of any individual staff in the program to do that similar work. And what we've noticed is that actually increases. And my staff get a minimum of 1 hour supervision with me, whether or not you're a program staff or a clinical staff a week. So I think that supervision is super key, Susan, to training and staff.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up on some of the thoughts I had. So I think it's super important. Of course, we have to have limits of what employees can and can't do. And once those limits are crossed, then you would have to part ways with that employee. But then there's also the learning moments. And our clinical director here, he tells this great story of he was a shoe salesman back in college, and he made a really big mistake that cost the company some money, and thought he was going to be fired, and his employer said, "Why would I fire you? Like this was like the best spent money on training. Like you're not going to make that mistake again." And so I think there's some concepts of like what are the areas of exploration for staff as they learn this really difficult business of how we treat people with substance abuse and mental health disorders. And we should engage with the employees in the same way, that remorse, empathy, and repair, and help them be a part of the repair process. If they've dropped the ball on something or did something wrong, help them and support them in coaching of how they repair with the client or with the family or with whoever, that they can be accountable and learn from it, because it'll be the best training that you'll ever pay for. And one plug that I would give is a book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a great book for leadership and for creating great team dynamics. And that very first level or the very first dysfunction is mistrust. And so, of course, the opposite of that, to have a functional team, you have to have a foundation of trust. And what that entitles is these trusting relationships that you believe that other person is doing the best they can, and we're all after the same mission and vision. And so that foundational work of that trusting relationship will spring rocket into more curiosity, exploration, and growth from the employee. Any other final questions? Well, I just have to say this has been really fun, Matt, to do this with you, to be on this process and this journey of exploring failure in treatment settings and just the flesh wound. So here's our contact details. You're welcome to reach out. We'd love to hear from any of you with any questions or feedback, any suggestions, or any collaboration. I think the more we can collaborate as treatment providers, the better we are, the better we elevate each other, and we will push each other to higher excellence. Can't wait to be with some of you in person one day again, and just such a gratitude to Green Hill Recovery. It's been such an honor to work together with them. They're amazing people. So
one second, Nikki, just because I got one final question with 3 minutes.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
So David asked, failure to launch and how that can be confused with an inappropriate patient.
Oh.
Hey, David.
Meaning like inappropriate, like they're at the wrong treatment center, like a wrong admission.
Can you clarify, like do you mean failure to launch in the program or? Yes, failure to launch in our program. So like, is a failure to start
Oh,
Is it,
got it. The failure to like jump into the program versus did we have an inappropriate admission and not meet our admission criteria?
yeah, so our admission criteria for us is very specific. So I think having a specific admission criteria often makes everybody like who's coming in appropriate. So that often leaves me getting curious about like, why are they not launching? Like someone's not getting kicked out of my program for not doing the workbook, if that makes sense, right? Like I've thrown out the workbook for certain clients who are like, I'm not doing that workbook. I'm like, great, let's not do it. Like, and really rolling with their, whatever the resistance is around the failure to launch in the program. Now I will say, there are also people who we've not been the best fit for because of like our guardrails around failure to launch. And I've seen it sometimes with like very significantly depressed patients who are struggling to gain some autonomy there or even some agency or efficacy. Now that being said, like I'm immediately curious about meds. I'm immediately like I'm looking at why are we failing the client, not why is the client failing us. So
Yeah, that's where I would add. I agree with everything you're saying, Matt, but I think every team should have a very healthy root cause analysis at the end of every stay with you, because just like we're asking our people to explore and create, like get challenged and get better, we should as treatment centers and not expect that we have it all there. So of course we have an admissions process, but after every person that exits our program, we do an RCA, a root cause analysis, where we're looking at what went well, what didn't, what was this an admission miss, what didn't we do, and from that we've had really great things come out of it. From admission, from not only do we have admission criteria, but we have admissions scales that we're looking at and questionnaires of looking at what we know, like if somebody has been homeless for a significant period of time and has a history of really strong drug use, that they have a really high rate of leaving our programs. They're highly resourceful on the streets, and they may need to look at something even prior to us. And so some of that has come out from those RCAs we've done. So as a team, I would say just having a really healthy adoption of an RCA process. Okay.
all right.
Oh, it's time. Well, look at this. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. This was so fun to have everybody here and for being a part of it. As stated earlier, we'll send out the slides and the recordings. So if you want to rewatch it, you're welcome to. But if you also, we'd love to hear from any of you if you want to reach out.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.